So Jesus had a lot to say about the issues of good and evil. He told the story of the weeds and the weed in the garden. In the story, Jesus is visiting the age-old conflict of good and evil. But Jesus has an uncanny approach. Don't attempt to root it out, lest you destroy good in the process. This parable isn't just so much about farming techniques as it is the way we view the world around us. Surely many listeners wanted to root out the Romans, the occupiers, as many Iraqi insurgents have pressed for rooting out American occupation. But Jesus looks for a different path to solving the troubles of the evils in his day. He wants to carry the pack of the enemy and overcome the evils of the conflict through love. He doesn't want to jump to the conclusion that the enemy, the weed, is unredeemable, or that destroying him wouldn't create even a bigger mess. He doesn't promote the rooting up of the evildoer, but leaving him in God's hands. And so he offers a strange image of how his so-called revolution would spread, like mustard. His kingdom is not like the lofty cedars of Lebanon or the enormous splendor of Rome. His people are small and modest. They consider the glory of the lilies in the field, for even Solomon in all of his splendor wasn't as great as them. To say that God's reign is like a mustard seed is to relocate your political hope. It is to no longer put your hope in the enormous Babel projects of the world, but in that small and peculiar people following in the footsteps of Abraham and Sarah. It assumes that turning the cheek and carrying the pack is more powerful than routing an army or building an empire. From this small seed, however unnoticeable, comes the blessing of the whole world.
Over and over, Jesus challenges those who the world would see at the top. He takes on the logic of the imperial cult. It's what got his cousin John the Baptist in trouble, and it'll get him in trouble. At one point, the authorities come and they tell Jesus that Herod is looking for him. And Jesus says to them, "Go tell that fox that I will continue on my mission of healing and miracles and teaching until I reach my goal." Fox, it's an interesting word, you know, and just like in our culture, eagles and donkeys and elephants and all these things have meaning. In their time, foxes also were richly symbolic. Calling Herod a fox instead of a lion was like saying that the U.S. national bird isn't an eagle but a vulture. It was him speaking with that metaphor. And the fox, you see, the lion was the king of the jungle, but the fox wasn't king of anything. You know, the fox was often mistaken for a lion, but was more of a wannabe, kind of an imposter, but was fearful and always scurrying off in the distance at every sound. So when Jesus is calling Herod a fox, I think everybody probably whispered to each other, "Holy cow, did you hear that? He called Herod a fox. Brother's going to get himself assassinated." You know, it's Jesus taking on the establishment, but with such humility and beauty. The way that they deal with that, though, with treason like that, is to cut off people's heads and to hang them on crosses.
Jesus' temptations are then what we might expect and what we might face. He's tempted to do something relevant, to turn stones into bread and make poverty history. He's tempted to do something spectacular, to fling himself from the temple and shock and awe people with his power. He's tempted with all of the power in the world. The temptation, however, comes directly from the mouth of the devil, who claims the keys of power. Jesus doesn't argue the claim. After all, if absolute power corrupts absolutely, it indeed seems that the devil is in charge of the principalities and powers. So he rejects the temptation to run everything. These are also the historical temptations of his people, Israel. And so he goes into the desert for 40 days, as his people went into the desert for 40 years, to overturn these mistakes. The temptations of wealth, power, and spectacle are to be shunned and resisted in the kingdom that he has come to inaugurate.
It's not surprising, though, that people have a hard time figuring out, is he the Messiah or not the Messiah? You know, and at one point, John the Baptist is in prison, and he actually sends his disciples to ask Jesus a very specific question. Are you the one that we've been waiting for, or should we expect somebody else? In Luke 7, they come up to Jesus and they say, "Are you the one that we've been waiting for?" And Jesus says this. He says, "Go tell John what you see and what you hear. It's absolutely brilliant. He doesn't go, yep, I'm the Messiah. You know, you don't ever see him walking around pimping out that he's the Son of God. He just lets his life speak for itself, and I think we have a lot to learn from that. He goes around, and when people figure out that he's the Messiah, they're like, whoa, you're the Son of God. He's like, shh, keep it on the down low, you know? And he invites people to follow him. He doesn't command people to worship him, but he invites everybody to follow. And people worship him not because he makes them, but because they want to, I think we have a lot to learn from his peculiar way of living. He's a strange king. He's a homeless rabbi. He heals outside the temple with things like dirt and spit. His kingdom is an upside-down kingdom that begins with kids and outcasts. He doesn't rule with an iron fist, but he rules with a towel. What kind of president washes feet? His vision is unlike any other ruler, and yet the people insist. They want a king like the nations. They want to stick it to the man. They want to take the power back. Wow, wow. You know, and like the time that Jesus heads in, we've got a few Rage Against the Machine folks in the house. Okay. The time that Jesus marches into Jerusalem for his triumphant entry is very interesting. He chooses the Passover festival, the anti-imperial Jewish holiday, one of the moments where they celebrate their liberation and God's protection from their oppressors. And the Passover festivals were notorious for riots and uprisings. The historians say that soldiers lined the streets. The revolution would have been thick in the air, and people would have been ready. They would have had their palm branches ready. And Jesus chooses this holiday as he enters in. The time for real change was ripe. It was right among them. And so they worship him as he enters in.
Holy, holy, holy Lord, God of power and might, heaven and earth are full of your glory. Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Holy, holy, holy Lord, God of power and might, heaven and earth are full of your glory. Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is he who comes in the name